105. If the panelists are here, will they come sit up front? We're not going to start right this second, but it would be good to have you sit up front so everyone can see you and I can talk to you. Salon. Okay, great.
My mom's from the Midwest, and she says Sala, so that's fine too.
Sala?
Yeah.
Sala.
Sala.
That's like a regional accent thing, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm cool. Good morning, everyone. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome back to day 2. Day 1 was incredible. We're all just so happy that you're here and so happy to be connecting with all of you in so many different ways. So today we have a very exciting panel, Reflections on the Archive and Future Research. And that was a big part of what we were also thinking about in this conference, in addition to all of the really important questions that we were raising yesterday about the uses of narrative and personal stories, is just what are people going to do with this resource? And this is a resource that we really hope people will draw upon in multiple ways. So our first speaker is Nick Yu. They are a PhD candidate at the UCLA Department of Gender Studies. They previously received a Master of Arts in Gender Studies at the Women and Gender Studies Institute at the University of Toronto, Canada. Their current research project explores Chinese massage workers' experience in the United States. Their work is informed and inspired by their own experiences of migration as a queer Asian gender nonconforming person in Hong Kong, Beijing, Toronto, and now Los Angeles. They are a core member of the Black Feminist Initiative at the Center for the Study of Women. And they are joining us on Zoom. Oh, I see them. Hello.
Hello.
Nick, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Yu, and I want to thank Dr. Rachel Lee and the amazing staff at the Center for the Study of Women, Barbara Streisand Center, for organizing this symposium. In this presentation, I highlight experiences of those that are chronically ill and often medically abandoned to show how they have choreographed their own ways of surviving this capitalistic world as a canary in the coal mine. Encountering various access of exclusion, these folks have unique lived experiences that have contributed to a network of canary knowledge that facilitates their survival in this world. Most participants of the project have experienced dismissal from family members, romantic partners, friends, coworkers, doctors, and more people that are supposed to care. Despite being dismissed, they pushed ahead and self-advocate for themselves. While the labor of self-advocacy is important and have led to many changes that are positive, most participants are made into self-advocates because of the dismissive attitudes of their symptoms of disability. This self-advocacy is not easy, particularly when they're living in a society that does not believe in multiple chemical sensitivity. So in this presentation, I draw from 4 interviews with women of color, and gender nonconforming people who are living with MCS, multiple chemical sensitivity, to outline the ways in which chronically ill folks impacted by environmental illness navigate the impact of disability as a worker. They each have their own way of disclosing their health status in work environments. They have also had to become their own versions of self-advocate within this healthcare system that diminishes their own experience. These oral history interviews were conducted by for Dr. Rachel Lee's research project, Chemical Entanglements. The interviews were conducted between 2019 to 2021 via the phone or on Zoom. These interviews are all available on the UCLA Center for Oral History Research if you're interested. And I'll be providing 4 snippets from 4 interviews with Ray Humphrey, Barbara Naguna, Tuquak, and Clara Olamido. So for many participants, they experience a life filled with restrictions. They experience a diminished access, not only to public spaces, but also private spaces that are supposed to be made available to them, including their own homes that were once safe to them. The system is certainly not helpful. For many, they have been socialized to believe that their chronic illness is their own problem to navigate, rather than an opening to imagine what we could do to make spaces more accessible to more people. Throughout their own emergent understandings of disability, these folks have had to bear the unfortunate cost of navigating a system that excludes disabled people. In addition to that, they continue to become further isolated rather than being embraced by the community. So my presentation will focus on the various ways that chronically ill and disabled people attempt to get the care and assistance they need in their own language. It features the lived experiences of predominantly people of color and how they attempt to get what they need in order to simply live. Unfortunately, in many cases, they end up living alone, they end up living outside, rather than interdependently with their community. This does not mean they failed, but rather highlights their endless drive and hard work towards attempting to mediate the care flow that makes their lives more livable. Despite being told that they're too sensitive, too much of a pain in the ass, and too much of a burden, these folks continue to show up as themselves and take up as much space as they have capacity for. This is also a presentation about the contradictions that disabled people have to face, being both too sick to work and too poor to pay. Chronically ill people of working class status are placed in a difficult position where they end up having to advocate for themselves. All 4 interview participants offer their lived experiences of MCS as situated within their race, class, and gender. They highlight the impossibility of living within capitalism, where they are made to navigate multiple constraints. In other words, disabled folks impacted by environmental illness suffer from what I call a disability tax that disproportionately asks disabled folks to spend time on documenting and proving their disability, but also while making requests of accessibility. In addition to that, disabled folks are often required to make purchases that makes their lives livable to accommodate their needs. In a world that is able-bodied focused, disabled folks have to navigate a system that already pays them less, but also pay more out of their own pocket to make their own lives possible. And on top of that, spending more time to navigate the calculus of whether they should or could disclose their disabilities to their employers and whether they can safely spend time with their loved ones. Despite this, all 4 participants that I'll introduce demonstrate a survivorhood that takes incredible strength, labor, and knowledge. So this is Clara. Born in late 1970s, Clara moved to Mexico from the United States when she was 8 years old. Growing up middle class in California as a family of 6, Clara recalls her father working in the United States during the summer as a seasonal farm worker. By her late 20s, Clara started noticing symptoms of chemical sensitivity. At first, she just, quote, just stayed quiet. She didn't mention it to anybody. She says, quote, I kind of just did it for myself and kept it to myself, end quote. Due to the lack of discussion of chemical sensitivity, Clara has had some doubt in her mind whether or not her sensitivity was real. In many ways, she was socialized to be ashamed of her own ability to, quote, tough it out with chemicals, end quote, and deal with scent triggers that are omnipresent in social environments. This was the case for other participants as well. They were made to, quote, feel too much, too sensitive, end quote, to the environment around them. Coincidentally, these experiences are more prominent for women, women of color, and gender nonconforming people of the working class status. This is Ray Humphrey, a gender nonconforming queer person living with multiple chemical sensitivity, who explains they consistently receive responses such as, oh, you're being dramatic. Oh, that can't possibly be real. Or, oh, come on now, when they disclose their health. This is what it looks like when the world around you is telling you what you experience is not real. Navigating a world where your reality is consistently denied is not easy. Just like Clara, many participants experience doubt at some point of their lives whether or not their illness is real. One way to mediate this in Ray's world would be to, quote, center the experience of the person who's speaking, and instead of rejecting outright something we don't understand or we've never experienced, being open to the idea that these are real experiences that people are having. Yes, it might be an inconvenience to what is your comfort of life, but at the end of the day, meeting the needs of people who are chemically sensitive is actually meeting the needs of everybody. Nobody really loses except for the people who profit from these chemicals being out in the world, end quote. They show a sharp understanding of why they experience their chemical sensitivity. Second, chemical sensitivity in many ways becomes a factor that makes social interactions and simple access to spaces, both public and private, difficult. For example, Clara would have to strategically choose where to sit in every classroom, sometimes scouting spaces beforehand to ensure the relative safety of a space. Imagine being in a classroom like this and having to decide where's the safest position for you to seat yourself. This took Clara time and effort. In addition to that, she would, quote, usually sit by the door in the very back where she can escape the smells. Despite this, Clara graduated university and became a civil engineer. As she started working, she had to navigate a work environment where scents proliferated the office. People affected by chemical sensitivity are often, like Clara, socialized into hiding their illness due to the worry of how others might perceive them, given their previous experiences of being belittled and traumas of people not believing their own real lived experiences. In the case of Clara, she began becoming more vocal with her needs to function in a workplace. She spoke with her supervisor, and her supervisor shared her chemical sensitivity with the office without her permission. Her supervisor asked employees to use products around Clara in the same office. As a result, Clara experienced exclusion from her coworkers. One coworker would roll his eyes and make comments about how sensitive she is when she wasn't around, and that maybe she's just not cut out for work. I apologize for the background noise. This is a common experience. Barbara also experienced this. Barbara Naguna said, when I go to another company and I'm qualified, and then we talk about remote, even though they say they do not discriminate, they give you accommodations, they're going to say no and not give you the job right away. I don't know. With my circumstances, I've done a lot of coaching on it. As much as it's toxic, it's also up to me to strengthen myself to be able to deal with this environment. That's what I've done. Just because quitting doesn't help my bills. End quote. In many cases, disabled and chronically ill people are made to, quote, become tougher because of the lack of existing support and systems. And again, quitting doesn't help my bills. All of them are deeply aware of the capitalistic constraints. In addition to this, people affected by chemical sensitivity are not only experiencing a social disability tax that diminishes their access to safe space, intimacy such as touch, and more, they're also experiencing a disability tax that is both monetary and time-based. In the case of Clara, she has had to spend a lot of money experimenting products that are safe to her. She explains, in the thousands. In addition to feeling sick after being exposed to a product that is marked, quote, fragrance-free and therefore relatively safe for her, Clara has had to spend a lot of time testing out and trying different products marketed for chemical sensitivity. Imagine the process that is filled with both emotional and physical labor using a product that is supposed to be safe because it is marked fragrance-free, but yet experiencing chemical exposure attacks that give you a migraine for the next 2 weeks. This is not an isolated incident for Clara either. Ray experiences this as well. They described the high cost of safe chemical-free products was a reason that they turned to develop their own skills as what they call a kitchen alchemist. As a chronically ill person who have to navigate unstable employment, Ray describes how they started making their own chemical-free products because they could no longer afford buying them. While it saved them on cost, it certainly did not save them time or energy. These are some of the creative ways that chronically ill people have to engineer paths of everyday survival to make their own lives livable. For many participants, they must navigate not only their own relationships to scents and chemicals, but their loved one's relationship to scents as well. Clara said, quote, people would dismiss any time we would talk about scent stuff. Even in my family, my mom still uses perfume, and she was living in my house for 10 years. She would just say like, oh, you're just being overly sensitive. I think that's the hardest part for us. But I feel like if we educate people, I think that's the best way to make them change their lifestyle and understand, end quote. Clara integrated this into her own life and questioned her own reality of chemical sensitivity. When she finally found the term, she began to educate her family. And even after 10 years, her mother still wears perfume as a trigger to her. She said, quote, I think for me, I want to say that I kind of felt relief when I found the word chemical sensitivity, that I wasn't crazy, she laughs, because I felt like maybe I was making stuff up. Or maybe my mom was right, that I was being overly sensitive about things. So I kind of felt relief, like, okay, I know what's going on now with my body. Now I can do something about it, end quote. For many people, especially women living with MCS, they struggle to have their loved ones, their doctors believe them, let alone accommodate them. This is Barbara, who I mentioned a little bit earlier. Born in Kenya, Barbara Naguna is an activist blogger who experiences a similar reality in her own family. She moved to the US with her family at the age of 9 and developed a nickel allergy at the age of 12, as well as a smoking sensitivity in her mid-20s. After college, Barbara moved state to state due to housing insecurity caused by chemical sensitivity. This is a very expensive endeavor to move state by state. As a young girl, her mother and siblings would dismiss her symptoms and say, "Yes, Barbara, we know you're sick. You're complaining about this, you're complaining about that. Just stop," end quote. As a result of being dismissed, Barbara started experiencing depression during her middle and high school year. She says, quote, "By 12 years old, it got so bad, I end up not speaking because I was just not being heard, and I just stopped speaking." Imagine being disbelieved to the point of muteness. In addition to this, Barbara had to navigate being believed as a chronically ill Black woman, which added an additional strain in her life. When asked whether race and gender played a role in how people perceive her illness when she discloses it, she responds, quote, "Yes, my race always has impacted me, fully. I know when I tell people about what I'm going through, it is less believed. It got to a point where they felt like I was lying. I had to do all these things because my coworkers weren't doing, give them metrics my coworkers weren't giving. I know it's my illness, but it's also like I'm less believed because I'm a Black woman," end quote. Despite not being believed and living with the trauma of being dismissed in her own home, in her own workplace, and in medical settings, Barbara had developed her own voice and became a self-advocate. And as you can see, they're pushed to become their self-advocate because no one else will advocate for them. In many ways, she was forced to become her own advocate. In her words, she says, quote, "No one else spoke up for me." This is why Barbara turned to blog writing. Her goal is to create an app for people with allergy to detect allergens in food and products. She described this as a, quote, "fun way to make a difference so that she does not feel stagnant in her own circumstances." This is just another example of how chronically ill people continue to create their own knowledge and network of exchange to make not only their own lives more livable, but others' lives more livable, and to share the knowledge that are made for and by chronically ill people affected by MCS. And perhaps that's the way forward, to include more knowledge produced by and for chronically ill people. We need more projects like Chemical Entanglements to shine a light on the impact of MCS so that able-bodied people can be exposed to ways of supporting their CRIP communities in CRIP language and imagination. And therefore, I want to end my presentation with an interaction that I have with Dr. Tu Quoc. Dr. Tu Quoc on the screen there is the Chief Deputy of Administration at the Asian Health Services and has been working in public health for over 2 decades. She's a refugee from Vietnam. She arrived at the United States at age 5 with her family. She's a fierce advocate for immigrant rights and have authored some of the leading community research focusing on Asian Americans and immigrant population. Her community research on Vietnamese nail workers and the impacts of chemicals were made possible by her own mother, who passed away from cancer after working years at a nail salon. When talking about her mother, Tu Quoc said, quote, "Here's a woman who never finished grade school, even in Vietnam. She asked these really important questions. I think that my mom definitely is a testament to how the answers often are within the community, that they know so much. They were not given this sort of platform to speak and share their ideas, and that I could have easily dismissed her because there was so much going on. But her idea was brilliant. I went on to use that same idea, not just link it to cancer files, but also birth files to understand adverse birth outcomes as well. But it all came from this woman who is suffering from cancer and is able to be so lucid to know that it's not a genetic thing, that it must be tied to something that she did because she can't understand why it's any different from anybody else. And then also thinking where we can get the data to actually carry it out. So it's the story of inspiration, and it's the story not just of resilience, but of intellectual property within the community," end quote. I find this interaction to speak volumes of why we need to source our knowledge from chronically ill people. And as a result of her mother's idea, Dr. Tu Quoc was able to identify the amount of Vietnamese nail workers that have been diagnosed with cancer due to years of exposure to acetone. I am dreaming of a present and a future where knowledge from the community is prioritized, centered, and I look forward to more spaces like this, where there is a platform to share their own words and their own ideas. It is only with their imagination that we can create a more just and accessible future for all. Thank you so much.
This thing moved. I did not know. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nick, for a really eloquent and inspiring paper. I forgot to introduce myself for those of you who are new on the live stream or in person. I'm Helen Deutsch. I teach English and Disability Studies at UCLA. I also just wanted to quickly mention, too, that if you want a link to the digital program, they're on little stands all around the room. And there is a link to the live stream as well on that if you need it. And I am moving on now. So our next speaker is Dana Sala. She is a graduate student in the social welfare program at the Luskin School of Public Affairs. She graduated in June with her Bachelor of Arts in Gender Studies from UCLA. Congratulations. And for her undergraduate senior capstone project, Dana centered her research around 3 oral histories from the OHEI archive, and her title today is Using the OHEI Archive in Research. Dana.
Oh, let's see. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to take a second to get acclimated up here. Okay. So let's see. Yes. Thank you, Helen. As she mentioned, my name is Dana. I am honored and grateful to be here. And like she said, I graduated in June with my Bachelor of Arts degree in Gender Studies. And to graduate, you have to take a senior research capstone class. And so I took that class with Professor Rachel Lee, and I'm so sorry. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Okay, so this will help you out.
Okay, great. So I probably needed a tutorial.
Just press, let's see. Okay, so that's forward.
Okay, great. Okay. So thank you. Forgive me. I'm a little bit nervous. Okay. Okay. Oh, thank you. Yes, so sorry. Eternally mortified that this is recorded and live streamed, but we're just gonna make this work. So on the first day of my research seminar class with Rachel, she told us that we would be using the Oral Histories of Environmental Illness archive as the source material for our research. And at the time, I couldn't imagine how I was going to use oral history to produce a research paper. But now that I'm on the other side of it, I can't really imagine having not used it. Partly because of the relationship that I cultivated with the oral histories that I used over the course of the fall quarter. So this time last year, I was taking this research seminar class. So taking Rachel's class, I certainly had the benefit of her guidance and materials and the assigned readings to help myself and my classmates engage with the OHEI archive. And I want to share some of the many things that I learned in that class, and they include some considerations to have while listening to an oral history, as well as some gifts from the professor. And I'll briefly share a little bit about my research throughout my presentation and a little bit at the end. Okay, so let's see. Let me just say that everything that I am using in this presentation was from the assigned readings in my research seminar class. This quote is from an article called Narrative Medicine. It's written by Rita Charon, who is a physician and the founder of the program in narrative medicine at Columbia University. And she writes, the physician grieves along with the patient, aware anew of how disease changes everything, what it means, what it claims, how random is its unfairness, and how much courage it takes to look it full in the face. So, though of course I am not a physician, I, like the physician, am listening to someone talk about their illness and share their story, how it has changed and impacted their life, their relationships, what they do, maybe what they don't do anymore, where they go, where they avoid going, and often the indifference and hostility that they're met with in employment and legal and medical interactions. I think that awareness of the grief of how disease changes everything asks the listener to empathize with the speaker. On the subject of listener and speaker, power and positionality weighed heavily in my research, and the following excerpts are from Beyond Women's Words. This is a compilation of essays that I recommend if you're interested in using oral history. It's on feminisms and the practices of oral history, and these specifically were written by Sarah K. Luce and Amy Starczewski. So the interview itself is political, fraught with complex power dynamics, and rich with liberatory and oppressive potential. So awareness that there is a power dynamic between the interviewer and the speaker is one filter to hear through that may change the way you interpret pauses when the speaker starts to say something and changes what they're saying, the interviewer interrupting the speaker or rephrasing a question. And this awareness was particularly salient for my research. In particular, I became very attuned to the laughter that I heard in these oral histories that always erupted after the speaker had used words that articulated a lot of pain and illness and really challenging circumstances. So I found it very interesting, to say the least. Feminist scholarship has helped to show all knowledge is produced through relations of power and a particular standpoint. So as a listener, an outside participant in the oral history, I of course come to the listening with my own identities and privileges and biases, and this is going to influence how I listen to something, and it may change depending on who is listening for all of those reasons. And I think it's just important to acknowledge one's positionality because we are producing knowledge with research. Okay. Oral history narratives are often complex, rich in the contradictions and ambiguities that characterize human beings and our interactions and decisions. They differ from other forms of autobiography and storytelling, in part because of the active role an interviewer plays in shaping the narrative. So, of course, not every oral history recording is between two strangers, but the ones that I spent time with, and I think many in the OHEI archive, the interviewer and speaker were more or less strangers, apart from some correspondence over email. And the way that we all share stories with the ones that we love and are comfortable with is very different than how we might express something to a stranger, and what we might omit and edit, and the emotion that we mask or don't mask. And the foundation of my research is arguably rooted in this dynamic between the interviewer and speaker, and just another component to keep in mind as you listen. Okay. And the last consideration I will highlight is tension. Tension gives some insight into the complexity and ambiguities and contradictions that Luce and Sterczewski are talking about. And this quote is from Why I Wrote the Wounded Storyteller by Arthur W. Frank. Which narratives will be people's resources as they tell stories of illness, and what kind of care do different stories anticipate? W.S., Wounded Storyteller, holds in tension the tragedy of illness and the possibility of illness revealing mortality's necessity and even gift. There's a lot to grapple with there, and I think that the point is the grappling. This tension that Frank refers to is also connected to what Sharon writes in Narrative Medicine. It is part of the change in the lives of people who are confronted with chronic illness and disability because of a shift in identity and the various roles people play in their lives. So in addition to the articles and essays that Professor Lee assigned to guide us in our research, there were a few more gifts that she gave to us that I will give to you and you can give to yourself when using the archive. So one thing was that we were told very early on in this class that we could listen for the pauses and the size and the dynamic between the speaker and interviewer. And as I mentioned, I focused on laughter in my research, and I don't think that I would have given myself permission to do so outside of, given myself permission to listen outside of the words and the narrative in a more literal way had I not been given that permission to do so. Rachel also had Sharon Daniel come and be a guest in our class. Some Santa Cruz folks, yeah, she's awesome. She is a professor at UC Santa Cruz, really remarkable visual and digital media artist. And if you're not familiar with her, I would encourage anyone, no matter what your discipline is, to check out her work. She has a project called Blood Sugar on her website that was particularly influential for me because she uses audio clips and pairs them with visuals in this way that's so interesting. And on her website, she actually has a screen recording of that project because the platform that hosted it became outdated. And she just sort of offhandedly mentioned that Scalar was this, potential option to migrate her project to at some point when she has time, which, is never. So I'm sure. But I'll talk a little bit more about Scalar in just a second. So the other thing is I had only one expectation when I enrolled in my research seminar class, which was that I would have to write a very substantial research paper in order to graduate. And Rachel gave us the option of doing that or creating a project that was pretty broadly defined, or procuring an oral history. And so this opportunity to be creative with my research, combined with the knowledge of Scalar, gave me a way to present and share the laughing and the oral histories I found so compelling, and organize the facets of my project in a way that I could not have done in a research paper. I don't think. So, oral history may be a good opportunity to think of new ways to present research other than a traditional paper, because it's a fairly unique medium in academia. Okay, so like I said, Scalar was introduced to me by Sharon Daniel, and this is going to sound like a pitch, but it's not. It's because it's free. So it is a practical solution because it's free and open source, and it's a web-based platform that allows people to, users to include audio and video and annotations and connections, and of course text. And so let's see, on the right, this is the title of my project called Beneath the Masks, and on the left is the navigation widget that I took a screenshot of because I think it's a good visual representation of what Scalar allows you to do, which is all of those different colors represent different parts. So some of it's video and audio and annotations and tags, and then different pages throughout the project. So I was teaching myself how to do this while I was taking other classes last fall and, taking this class. So there was a time limit as far as like what I could learn to do and achieve, but I could certainly recognize the potential and capabilities that it had outside of what I use, and it's very cool and versatile. And so, as I mentioned, the dimorphous expression of laughter in these oral histories captured my attention, and I was able to incorporate research on the evolutionary psychology of Duchenne and non-Duchenne laughter. I connected it to environmental illness, and I ultimately argued that laughter is gendered. So here is an example of a video I edited of one of the oral histories I used and embedded in my Scalar project. I used Final Cut to edit it. It's hosted on YouTube, and then I embedded it on Scalar. I don't know if it'll, okay. Let's see if it will work. Nope, hold on. We're all not surprised that I'm having trouble. Yeah, I think so too. Oh, okay. It's okay. Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
Hold on, let's see. Thanks for asking that, that's good. That's sound, that's not sound, right? Or maybe this
Yeah,
is.
it's hard.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Button. So can you?
Sorry.
It's okay. There are like 4 sound buttons.
And then I was getting stressed, so because it was getting to me. So that's why we moved. I was standing. Yeah, it's hard.
Thank you.
And then I was getting stressed, so because it was getting to me. So that's why we moved. I was standing. Yeah, it's hard. My pulmonologist diagnosed me with asthma, so, and I'm on inhalers. I got a whole thing of stuff. And I have to bring it with me every day. Like if I go out, so I have like a backpack with all my medications because I never know what I'm going to need. Because a lot of masks have carbon filters in it. And I found out I'm allergic to the carbon filters.
Oh.
Whatever they put in it would irritate my skin. So, but yeah, been doing this for a long, been studying it for a long time. And hopefully get my Social Security. I have eye drops, nasal sprays. Oh, Ziplocs are my friend. Yeah, no, this is my one little bag of stuff I have to bring with me just to leave my house. But yeah, we had to change our lifestyle.
Yeah.
So it stinks.
I remember on the first day of my class, Rachel asked us what our favorite project was that we had done thus far in higher education. And at the time it was something different, but now I can safely say this is my favorite project that I've done in my academic life, and certainly the one that I am most proud of. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that. That was like a work of art, that final thing. I have so many thoughts.
There's more. You should have put the URL so people can see it.
We can email it out to people. Okay. Our next speaker is Abraham Encinas, who is a PhD graduate student in English at UCLA. His dissertation examines the fraught relationship between language and power by analyzing novels of dictatorship in U.S. multi-ethnic literature and Latin American literature. He can speak, read, and write in academic Spanish fluently and has done work in oral and written translation. I love this part. On the side, he has produced a podcast called Extreme Vocabulary, which looks at the culture behind words, and he would someday like to write a graphic novel. And his title today is Hemispheric Narratives of Environmental Illness.
All right, so how do I do this? I just press this button?
Sure.
Just,
Okay. This is forward, this is back.
Okay.
Only if you touch this.
okay, cool. Yeah, I'm fine.
No, just no.
No, it's fine. Good morning. Buenos dias. This is going to be a bilingual talk. I think we might have some people on Zoom who are going to be listening. Esta plática va a ser bilingüe por causa de algunos auditores en Zoom que hablan español. So my talk is called Hemispheric Narratives of Environmental Illness. La plática de hoy se llama Narrativa Hemisférica de Enfermedad Ambiental. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a UCLA grad student in the English department, interested in American hemispheric studies and genres. I'm bilingual in English and Spanish. And, I was brought onto the project by Rachel Lee so that I could interview Spanish-speaking domestic workers. So, un poquito acerca de mí, soy alumno de UCLA de estudios graduados en el departamento de inglés. Y estoy interesado en estudios del hemisferio americano y en géneros de narrativa. Soy bilingüe en inglés y en español, y Rachel Lee me reclutó al proyecto para entrevistar trabajadoras domésticas de habla español. So just a little bit about the interviews that I conducted. So they all took place in August 2020 during the pandemic. In total, they were about 7 Zoom interviews with domestic workers who are migrants residing in California and who had experiences with environmental illnesses. Un poco acerca de las entrevistas. Todas fueron conducidas en agosto del 2020. En total, 7 entrevistas por Zoom. y aquí escribí los nombres de las participantes: Anabel, Elizabeth, Erika, Evelyn, Noemí, Socorro y María. Y todas eran trabajadoras domésticas, migrantes residiendo en California, con experiencias de enfermedad ambiental. So I should quickly mention that I wrote the names of all the people that I interviewed there if you want to look them up. Okay, so just, what's the proposal here? So the current project and the California Women's Collective is interested in environmental illness narratives. And what I want to suggest is that if we think hemispherically, if we have a hemispheric focus, we kind of expand the narrative of environmental illness. And so I suggest that maybe environmental illness is geopolitical. Entonces lo que propongo aquí es que el proyecto corriente de la colectiva de mujeres se interesa en narrativas de enfermedad ambiental. Y quiero sugerir que el enfoque hemisférico expande la narrativa de enfermedad ambiental. Y de nuevo quiero sugerir que enfermedad ambiental es geopolítico. So a little bit just about the interviews and my approach to them. I think there was an element of the way that I approached it was with an element of familiarity and also just as a learner, right? That in terms of familiarity, it's the idea that there was a shared cultural background with the people that I interviewed. And so when I asked them questions, I was able to speak to them in a certain kind of register that, where they would feel maybe more comfortable with me. And I'll give you an example in a bit. And then as far as being a learner, I approached it as, just a student, as a student who was willing to learn from them and who is working kind of like outside my own discipline, right? I think about again, novels of dictatorship, and it's like, okay, well, I'm doing something completely different now. Okay, entonces, en base de las entrevistas, yo las tomé con un elemento de familiaridad y con un elemento de aprendiz. O sea que yo sentí que teníamos una cultura similar, yo y las entrevistadas, y entonces por eso pude hablarles en una habla vernacular. Y la otra es que pues tomé la posición de aprendiz, o sea que soy estudiante, dispuesto a aprender, y estoy trabajando fuera de mi entrenamiento, así que había mucho que podía aprender de ellas. So the example I want to give you here, by the way, is the way I would say okay, because I would always say it with like a Spanish accent. I would say like okay, right, which is not exactly the same as saying okay. So, if you listen to the interviews, you can pick up on that. But there's a few other ones that are there, but this is I think one of the more little small ones there. Okay, entonces vamos a hablar acerca de la forma de las historias de enfermedad. So I want to talk about the shape of these illness narratives. Okay. Primeramente, estas narrativas empiezan en Centroamérica rural y muchas de las cosas que dijeron las entrevistadas era, por ejemplo, empezaban con esta frase: todo era sano. Hablaban de cómo los ríos estaban limpios para bañarse, para nadar, para pescar y aún para lavar ropa. Hablaban mucho ellas acerca de cómo eran niñas corriendo en el campo, cómo la familia hacía su trabajo campestre. Hablaban de olores agradables que venían de la cocina. Y cuando hablaban de limpieza, hablaban de productos naturales, por ejemplo, de limón, vinagre y jabón. So the stories began in rural Central America. And so one of the phrases that kept coming up was everything was healthy. Now, I want to come back to this translation here. But they say everything was healthy. And so a lot of the people I interviewed would talk about clean rivers used for bathing, swimming, for fishing, doing laundry. And they would talk about themselves as children running through open spaces. They would talk about the family agricultural work of like working with their fathers, alongside their brothers and sisters. They would talk about the pleasant food smells coming from the kitchen. And then when it came to cleaning, they would talk a lot about natural cleaning products. So they would talk about like lemon, vinegar, soap, things like that. So this translation here that I'm providing, by the way, of todo era sano, la traducción que ofrezco ahí, is a little bit strange because the word sano, that in Spanish, also has a moral valence. So, you know, I'm not really sure how to translate that, okay? So it could be like everything was healthy or everything was like morally good. So that's kind of interesting. Entonces la frase, cuando la traduzco al inglés, todo era sano, yo conozco que en español sano también tiene una indicación moral, como decir todo es moralmente bueno, okay? All right, so migration reasons. So when it came to migration, they would talk about economic necessity of just having to leave because they just didn't have enough, either for clothes or for food or for the children's schooling needs, etc. Other times they would talk about a deceased parent or a family member. Sometimes it was like a father who had passed away and therefore the mother decided that they needed to leave. And sometimes it was about the continuation of like problems in the country with civil wars that began in the 80s and continued into the 90s, etc. So algunas causas que nos contaron de migración eran que había mucha necesidad económica, porque no alcanzaban para los biles, la ropa, los estudios de los niños, etc. También algunas veces hablaban de fallecimiento de un padre o otro familiar y que después del fallecimiento de tal relación decidieron que se tenían que ir. Algunas veces también hablaban acerca de la continuación de las guerras civiles en Centroamérica en los 80s que continuaban hasta los 90s. All right. Entonces, let me just start in English. So some of the domestic work in the urban U.S. So, you know, they migrate and then they talk about like the domestic work they're doing here. So they talked a lot about like industrial strength products. So a lot of them mentioned Clorox and Ajax. And then when it came to pesticides, they talked a lot about Raid. Entonces ya cuando llegaron aquí, hablaban acerca del trabajo doméstico en estos términos, hablaban de los productos industriales que usaban, por ejemplo, el cloro, el Ajax, y cuando hablaban de pesticidas, hablaban de Raid. In terms of the illnesses themselves, they talked a lot about like irritations on the skin, the hands, the eyes. They talked a lot about headaches, dizziness, difficulty breathing, environmental allergies. And some of them would mention something strange. It's like, oh, my spouse or my husband also has cancer and the doctors don't know why. Entonces en términos de las enfermedades hablaban mucho acerca de irritaciones de piel, manos, ojos, dolores de cabeza y mareos, dificultad respiratoria, alergias ambientales. Y a veces mencionaban algo que me parecía interesante, que hablaban de esposos con cáncer y decían con frecuencia los doctores no saben por qué tiene cáncer. And then we get to their collective work. So a lot of them experienced their joining the women's collective as this like moment of transformation for them. So they would say things like, you know, I was a very shy person. I was shy about speaking in public, but now I'm a like workshop leader, or I'm a coordinator, or I do this and that, and you know, I'm able to speak in front of legislatures, etc. And some of them would say things like, yes, God brought me to the organization. So, you know, there's a kind of like religious valence to the transformation there. Cuando hablaban acerca del trabajo colectivo, hablaban de ello como un momento de transformación muy importante cuando ingresaban a la colectiva de mujeres. Algunas decían cosas como, me daba vergüenza hablar en público, pero ahora soy líder, organizadora, puedo hablar en frente de los legisladores. Y también algunas decían, Dios me trajo a la organización, como que el momento de transformación tiene un elemento religioso. So let me come back to this then. So what would it mean to think about this as hemispheric narratives? ¿Qué significaría entender estas historias como narrativa hemisférica? So one of the questions that kind of came up a few times was, what's the purpose of this interview? Like, why are you interviewing me? So I think the way that we kind of understood it was that they have this rehearsed narrative of illness, that they practice in front of legislators, right? So they practice it and then they go tell their story. So the audience is legislators, and the purpose at the time of the interview was that they wanted to persuade legislators to pass SB 1257 so that they would have labor protections under Cal OSHA. So, entonces, una pregunta que me hacían con frecuencia era, ¿cuál es el propósito de la entrevista o qué van a hacer con estas entrevistas? Entonces determinamos que para ellas tienen una narrativa de enfermedad ensayada, algo que practicaban con frecuencia para poder darla en frente de legisladores. Eso significa que pues la audiencia son legisladores y el propósito de hablarles a ellos era persuadirlos a aprobar la ley SB 1257 para que tuvieran protección laboral bajo Cal OSHA. So what happens if we change up the audience then? What happens if the audience is me, right? If the audience is, students or unknown future readers, listeners, and what if the purpose then also changes up, right? Because the value of the testimony is the testimony itself. And so, we can then begin to notice another difference, right? That we're not really starting with their domestic work, but starting a lot sooner, right? We're starting with their early lives in their country of origin. Entonces, ¿qué pasaría si cambiamos la narrativa y la audiencia ya no es la misma, no son los legisladores, sino soy yo, un estudiante o otros estudiantes? ¿Y qué pasaría si la audiencia también sería futuros lectores o auditores que no conocidos? Cambiaría también el propósito de la narrativa, o sea que el valor de estas narrativas sería el testimonio en sí mismo. Y una diferencia en la narrativa, pues, es que empezamos con la vida temprana en el país de origen, que no solo nos enfocamos en la historia de su trabajo doméstico, sino en la vida temprana de cada una de ellas. So then what would be the hemispheric here? I want to suggest that the hemispheric here would be the story that connects their lives in Central America with their lives in the U.S. That is perhaps also a narrative that they haven't been asked to tell until now, that, because they've rehearsed a certain kind of narrative before legislators. Now they're being asked to do something different. So in a sense, we're kind of throwing them off script. And we're also changing up the genre pattern of their illness narratives. Entonces, ¿qué sería aquí lo hemisférico? Sería, por ejemplo, que la historia que conecta sus vidas en Centroamérica con los Estados Unidos. Y también sería una historia que quizás no se les ha pedido previamente. La historia ensayada que ellas dan es para los legisladores, pero ahora les estamos pidiendo algo nuevo. Queremos saber acerca de sus vidas tempranas. O sea que las estamos desviando del guión y estamos cambiando el patrón del género. We also have like a contrast between Central America and the U.S. There's this like very strong contrast between the, everything was healthy, and now I am in a toxic environment. So they offered like this very strong contrast. The other thing that this does is that it widens, it's a widening of the environmental as geopolitical, right? That where does the toxicity begin? What does it mean? And also a kind of question here, like what is it to be exposed to environmental toxicity, right? And the other thing is that maybe they're in search for allies. And the way that they talk to me, right, this kind of phrase that they would use, we want you to know, and they were like referencing me specifically, we want you as a student to know this. And they were, in a sense, speaking to me as a representative student, as like someone who would represent, like, I don't know, all the UCLA students. Ok, entonces otras ideas aquí, sugerencias. Que hay un contraste entre sus vidas en Centroamérica y las vidas en los Estados Unidos. Muchas ofrecían un contraste fuerte entre la manera que todo era sano en Centroamérica, pero aquí sus vidas es una vida de toxicidad. Lo hemisférico también ofrece una expansión geopolítica de la enfermedad ambiental y podemos decir entonces dónde empieza la enfermedad ambiental. Y una pregunta que tengo es ¿qué es estás expuesto a la toxicidad ambiental? Y otra cosa que hacían es que pues en cierto sentido están en busca de aliados. Y frecuentemente se referían a mí con esta frase, queremos que tú sepas, como que se estaban refiriendo a mí como un representante de estudiantes y aún específicamente como un representante de estudiantes en UCLA. So then I'll just kind of leave you with this question. How does the hemispheric perspective change the narrative of environmental illness? Y entonces les dejo con esta pregunta. ¿Cómo cambia la narrativa de enfermedad ambiental dentro de la perspectiva hemisférica? Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Wow, that was another wonderful paper. And I handed over to questions. We did start a little late. Do we have a little flexibility? Because we have a live stream, right? Don't we have May's poem? Okay. We're going to take a little time for questions, but my final introduction is Ilya Levine, they, who is a 2023 graduate of the UCLA Department of Gender Studies and the Labor Studies program. Congratulations. And she made the amazing short film we saw yesterday, the screening of the stories of Maya and Aurora, which when, Dana, you were talking about the sound and imagery combination of your thesis, I thought a lot, Ilya, about your film. So Ilya's here in case you also have questions for her about the film, and also if you would like to weigh in on any questions, general questions that are asked, please do. So I'm going to go sit here now. Kaja has the mic. If you have a question, please speak into the microphone.
Or raise your hand, I'll bring it over.
Thank you so much for this panel. So ever since Nick quoted someone talking about living and being in relation with environmental illness, I think the quotation was something like, it might be an inconvenience to what is your comfort in life. Sorry.
Can we put Nick back on the screen? Sorry, Leslie.
Oh, no worries. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Nick. So ever since Nick was quoting someone who said it might be an inconvenience to what is your comfort in life, I was kind of thinking about the rubric of accommodation as something that is inconvenient or something that makes you feel as if you are being inconvenient. And I think this kind of relates a little bit to Dana's talk, particularly like the moments of tension that gave rise to those moments of laughter. But I was wondering, like, how can we maybe think about inconvenience as like a productive kind of relation or tension?
Hi. Thank you so much for that question, Leslie. I think about interruption and inconvenience and alongside with queer of color critique and CRIP ideologies where inconvenience is a disruption to the normative routine of what accommodation should look like, can look like, and have the possibility to transform. And inconvenience itself is a critique, right? It's a feminist intervention of critique that allows an opening of rethinking about what is included in accommodation and what is excluded from accommodation. But I think of it as a queer affect or a queer crip affect that allows for the critique of hegemonic understandings of what accommodations could look like. And I would be interested to know what Dana thinks.
I believe we have Dana here.
Thank you, Nick. Leslie, can you rephrase or ask your question again?
So this arose from a quotation in Nick's interview, or many interviews is quoted. But someone was talking about how having an environmental illness, sorry about that. Someone was talking about how having an environmental illness could be an inconvenience to one's life. And I was trying to think about how we might reframe inconvenience. Oh, cat. As not necessarily like a bad kind of relation, but maybe as a productive relation. And I was kind of thinking maybe in kind of related terms about your interviews and how those moments of laughter were kind of disruptions in the conversation that created maybe like the sense of like cognitive dissonance at first, but maybe brought you into like a new relation with the interviewee.
Would you like me to talk about the inconvenience or the
Whatever
okay, okay, sure. Well, I think inconvenience is an opportunity to, maybe look for different solutions. I think Nick said it really well. I don't know that I can say it better as far as the relation with the oral history and that laughter, and I just got so fixated on it, and I think that it's interesting. I don't think that it comes out of a place of like it's really born out of that relationship and that situation that's occurring like in the oral history interview, but I think because of my own positionality, I was so attuned to it as someone who identifies as a woman and has like just various aspects. Like I just really related to it, but I'm probably not super qualified to answer this question in a very academic way either.
Can I add something?
Of course.
Thank you. So one of the oral histories that I dealt with was by Aurora Levins Morales, and she's an activist, and so she was talking about how at all of these events that she was going to where they would try and feed everybody and everyone had all these different dietary restrictions, they kind of took it as way more inconvenient than it needed to be. And they were like, we have to get a gluten-free option and a vegan option and a celiac. And she was like, just separate all the ingredients. just let everyone add what they want to add. And it's so much easier. You don't have to add everything together. You can just let people take what they need to take, which I think is an interesting application of inconvenience.
I'll add something.
Please.
That's an interesting question, Leslie, because in this case, I may have been the inconvenience. Like, like when they ask me, like, so what's the purpose of the interview? And it's like, oh, like, yeah, what am I doing here? Like I'm not like I'm not like your regular audience, right? I'm kind of like asking them all kinds of questions about their like personal lives, and yet I may have been a slight useful inconvenience in a sense, right? Because we can figure out like a lot more about what's going on in their lives earlier and how that might be related to their later lives. So, yeah.
Okay, Carla, please.
Just thank you for this incredibly brilliant panel, and I just wanted to thank you for this incredibly powerful and brilliant panel about kind of the deep structure of the interview, expanding the question, what is and isn't an oral history. Amazing, thank you. And I just wonder if Abraham and Dana want to talk to each other a little bit. I was thinking about Dana. If you have any other coordinates for locating the laughter, cultural, affective, or theoretical, if you think about the laughter, when you came up with this as a distinctly gendered phenomenon, it struck me that the interviewers were also women, and that there was an asymmetry in who was laughing and who was not. And I think, embarrassment, absurdity, the work of laughter in healing, in mental health and in health studies. It's not laughing in the midst of a conversation. So I was wondering about other coordinates, perhaps cultural coordinates of that laughter. And similarly for gender, for Abraham, I think you just started to answer that. It sounds like you saw yourself as a little bit of an inconvenience, which is a wonderful relocation. And it is very much in line with your interview style, which is offsetting the power differential. Mm-hmm. Very, very sensitive. I'm a student, I'm a listener, I'm not, and I'm also idiomatically connected to you. I'm very sensitive to what may make you comfortable and take that estrangement aspect out. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about gender. So kind of switching it up, since I think they were mostly women. Mm-hmm. And if you saw or could think back, so talk to each other in some sense.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yes, I think that there are other coordinates, absolutely. And one of the people in one of the oral histories that I used, which is what we listened to, that particular woman was of a low SES, I believe not a college graduate, which was the population that I was interested in. And she was white as well, and the other individual was a black woman, middle-aged, had several master's degrees, I believe also a JD. So it is interesting what laughter, what function it plays, and I think part of it is smoothing out tension in a conversation with a stranger about something that could potentially make them uncomfortable. Again, I guess it connects to being an inconvenience, being used to being perceived as an inconvenience. That was certainly a theme throughout. And even within all of their family and interpersonal relationships, their environmental illnesses, they all sort of referred to it as something different. it was very clear to them that it was an inconvenience from romantic partners, family members, and it's interesting, you know, Angela, Vanessa, the woman that's Black and a lawyer, and she has like a couple master's degrees. She didn't speak to this directly, but about like how race played into her challenges in navigating disability from her employer. But again, it's something that wasn't included in her interview. And I don't know, I can't help but ask, like, is that influenced by who she's interviewing with? I think the interviewer was a young white woman. So these dynamics are, you know, there's sort of, you can go down so many rabbit holes, and if the quarter offered more weeks, I think I would have gone down more, but as we know, it goes by fast. But anyway.
Yeah, so I'm like trying to recall not just like my interview style, but also like how like some of the interactions where I might have been the one who was laughing because I was nervous, right? Especially when I first started, like with the first interviews. And I do think it is like what you're saying, like the smoothing out of tension, right? Of like talking to a stranger and asking them these like personal questions. It's like, and how does like toxic, you know, how does like this illness affect your relationship with your husband, you know? And I'm a man who's talking to a woman about this. It's like, I don't know if I should be asking this. So there's a kind of, there's that. But the other thing I'll point out is that when I did laugh about some of the things that they said, it would usually elicit more of an affirmation on their side. They would say something like, no, yeah, let me tell you. And then they would like repeat what they said and affirm it. So in that case, my own laughter is eliciting more affirmation from them. So, yeah.
I mean, I had a really quick related question, which is lots of us in this room are interested in crip joy and crip laughter. And so told as an ethnographer, I think you guys have done an amazing job of thinking about interview dynamics, and it's super important. And also want to suggest that not all laughter is functional, right? Or it may be functional. Many of us self-medicate through joke telling, like I just did. It's an incredibly important survival strategy to be able to kind of revel in the absurdity of all of it. And it is not just, it's a way, it doesn't just ease tension. I think, Abraham, you just addressed this. It brings other people in. It allows us to crack jokes that create community because nobody else gets it. But it also enables us to, to bring people in. So I think that keeping open the multivalence of what laughter can be, including that, Cynthia, are you here? It can increase your dopamine. Yeah, exactly. If I'm not feeling well, Cynthia just tries to make me laugh.
Thank you so much for these presentations, and this was so fantastic. You know, I kind of wanted to go back to the question of inconvenience and accommodations, and sort of maybe ask folks to think about that in relationship to the structure of care labor in the world, because of course I know Nick's own project is very much about that, and Nick is kind of, this is one of their expertises. So I'm setting it up for them a little, but also, I mean, in terms of interviewing domestic workers, right? So in other words, I think one of the ways that people have critiqued from what I understand, People in Disabilities Studies has critiqued sort of the ADA and the idea of individual accommodations at all, right? Is that it's, about individual accommodations. And the way that care labor is structured in the United States and globally, actually, is that the people who are going to be making these accommodations or accommodating people, right, are going to be like gendered, racialized, classed in particular ways, right? So I'm wondering if we could also think about, how we might rethink a paradigm around sort of disability, right? That's sort of more expansive than the idea of individual accommodations, so as to challenge, the unevenness of exploitation around care labor. Yeah.
Thank you, Grace, for your incredible question. I think about this alongside with Leah Lakshmi's work. So in Lakshmi's work, she writes, quote, "Many of us had been raised as immigrants and or women or femmes of color to always jump up and feed people first, to do all the dishes and help without being asked while serving ourselves last. For many of us, care had always been something that was forced on us, something abusive family members or teachers or healthcare workers did, whether we liked it or not. Or care had been something it wasn't safe to say we needed because there was no care out for us, no health care, no therapist, no parent with time, no safe parent who actually cared," end quote. This was in her book, Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. And I think it really sums up the dynamics of care labor and the unevenness of that exchange that Grace have so eloquently pointed out. And so when we talk about care, I think the first question that comes to me is who's doing the care and who is being inconvenienced, right? So the power relation of imagining inconvenience is structurally so different when it comes from one perspective versus the other. So when I talk about inconvenience as a careful critique, I'm thinking about folks that are living with disabilities that are using inconvenience as a form of desiring more, as a form of presenting an obstacle, as a method of carving out an opening. And I find that the practice of naming or being an inconvenience can be read as a form of critique, right? And Black feminist Jennifer Nash writes about the critic as a loving figure that is generous and offers a different way of approach. And so I'm thinking about the ways that these folks are naming or being an inconvenience as a loving figure to really reform some of the existing structures of accessibility that thinks about care as a unidirectional delivery, right? That disabled people can't be capable of caring for themselves or others and are just simply there to receive care and are complaining, quote, complaining that it's not enough. So I think that really points to the way in which inconvenience really interrupts the structure, right? That in fact, me being an inconvenience is me presenting a form of care to the overall structure by naming the gaps and naming the insufficiency of the giving and receiving of care. I hope that kind of answers the question.
I would say it more than answered the question. I don't know that we have, do we have time? No, okay. Pata, where are you pointing?
Somebody.
Okay, Jim.
Thank you for this great panel. I just have a quick question. I'm trying to think of a thread through all four, the three presentations today and then yesterday's film. And one of the things that I was fascinated by were the ways that all of your presentations, including the film, tried to speak to other forms of communicability than the primacy of the verbal and in the case of illness and disability studies here in the US, the primacy of the English verbal. And so for us students of illness and disability, if there was one thing that you would want us to be mindful of when engaging illness narratives, what beyond the verbal would you want us to pay attention to?
I just want to add on to that because I have yet to ask a question at this conference. So, and that's fine. I've learned so much. I have just wanted to be quiet. But I was going to ask something, Jim, related to what you're saying, which is that there are so many different modes of listening that we have heard about in all these papers, and listening for also to get to what Grace, you were saying, something bigger than just an individual diagnosis too, like listening for a bigger picture and listening to things that you can't always understand, like Illy in your film. There was so much cacophony. So Jim, I thank you for your question because it kind of put very concisely how we can use some of what we've heard today. Does anyone have thoughts on that?
I just want to add on to it too. But this is kind of like cheating, right?
No, there's no cheating.
May is online, just so you know.
So just to add to that as well, though, especially bringing up Illy's the cacophony, which is sometimes it doesn't have to be useful, right? Like that it's also listening for what isn't useful to SB 1257, right? And I went to the aesthetic, but I'm glad you put it this other way, because part of what the gift is that you're letting others stay with the trouble, or as Ileana's actually the person who was like, it's a bummer, right? And we use this as staying with the bummer. Staying with the bummer, staying with the inconvenience. As the care, I remember when we first started listening to these in the class, I was like, oh my God, the students aren't going to want to listen, right? Because the stories are hard to listen to, but we stayed with the bummer. And then you didn't resolve the bummer in the film. You stayed with it. And so maybe that's a different way of thinking about like what's useful or not useful. And I don't know, maybe that's what I was thinking. Sorry, you guys were just using this as an occasion to get over.
So bear with me, because of course I'm nervous speaking again. But Abraham, so you had mentioned that, yeah, you had recognized that you were probably the inconvenience, but that you saw that they were reaffirming what they were saying when you laughed, and that means that those that have experienced that trauma recognize that it was safe. Your laughter was actually safe laughter, which I want to point out. It seems like every educator in this class or in this this room, this setting right now, appears to have all had safe laughter, and we're all just laughing. And I can recognize that, right? Because I'm a trauma survivor. And as, excuse me if I mispronounce your name incorrectly, but Nick, you had mentioned Barbara, who had stopped speaking when she was in middle school because she was constantly being dismissed. Well, I've experienced that exact same thing. I have had conversation anxiety. I've just stopped, but I wasn't just being dismissed with like the fragrance. I was being dismissed long before that, right? And so obviously you guys in this room with your laughter and love has opened me up to speak, and I wish that you could just be able to educate every single person in this world, because our world is clearly falling apart. But you guys need the accolade, because you're the ones who are listening but have loving laughter rather than the toxic laughter, which is what does shut us up, which is what dismisses us, and then we lose our voice. So.
That was beautiful. Yeah. I ask anyone, any of the panelists who has any final thought or anything they want to leave us with?
May I jump in quickly to just address the previous comment? Thank you for that beautiful comment. And in terms of Barbara, I read her silence and quiet as a space of possibility when she's cultivating her own expressive strategies, right? At that time, the expressive strategies were not in her own hands yet because of the experiences that she encountered. But quietude was actually a way that she developed that space of possibility where her memories, traumas, voices, opinions developed and emerged into a presence. So I think in terms of listening, there, and as Rachel said, there was listening in real time when I was conducting the interviews and listening afterwards. And I think the silence and the quiet speaks volumes in the sense that it speaks to the unspeakable, right? The unnameable, the unspeakability of some of these experiences. So I really urge you all to listen to the moments of pausation that signals absence and withholding that are present in their own right and are made strategically to express something.
Well, on that note, I ask you to please thank all our wonderful panelists. And we are now going to hear a poem. Rachel, do you want to go ahead?
So we are now going to, I'm sorry, we're going to skip the break and we're going to go straight into a poem by Mimi Bursenberger, who is a late arrival to the archive. I've been chasing that interview for 2 or 3 years. And finally some time opened between the long COVID and chemical sensitivity experience. And I'm so glad that Mimi wrote a poem called V is for Vulnerability, and she's here to close out the conference by reading it for us today.
Okay, hello everybody, and I'm so honored to be included in this historic conference. Let me see, I was exposed to a pesticide in 1990 and have dealt with chemical sensitivity since then. Let's see if it's then in 2020 my husband and I got a bad case of COVID, and then we dealt with long COVID. And so when I wrote all the kinds of vulnerabilities that we have in our bodies kind of combined. And also, I was trying to toggle between illness as an enemy, and then illness is part of illness and ourselves as part of one world. I also think a conference like this is very exciting because vulnerability, aspects of vulnerability, and including vulnerability and our expression of ourselves, I think it's a new step in evolution. So. Okay, this is in 5 parts. V is for vulnerability. The emotion of the virus changes this morning. Intentions shift as it settles into its place as an intelligent being. It's building a relationship with our genome and with Earth, so bodies, minds, tech, and nature can evolve to accommodate something this big. Last night I dreamt we caught it. There were no symptoms, more like mushrooms flooding the mind. Some layers bioluminous and some dark, adrift on an ocean floor. I need more courage for this consuming lesson of something sentient in me trying to kill me. Fear propagates virus. Now it penetrates cell nuclei as RNA genetically imprints, disrupting self by dramatizing, for example, new correlations of power and powerlessness, of virulence, fire, drought, of entitlement and humility. The virus learns too. It strives to assimilate the paradox between our survival and its proliferation. This back and forth with vulnerability raises our consciousness. We witness a mass exodus of souls from one plane to another. One male avatar lingers around us while others continue to walk by. Regret has become his identity, caught between dimensions by his experience of illness. Many recently alive possess very high frequencies of the virus itself, weirdly similar to prayer. I pray for those who are passing and those held, interrupted, waiting for the miasm of shock to subside, so they may go forward and leniency is granted. When two panes of glass press together, light forms rainbows between them. Any slight move swirls colors made from photons in interference. I feel dislocation, a lack of solidity. Shift an inch, and my bed is mist. Between vapor droplets is a liminal space where light meets its own counterforce, and we are suspended, not knowing how to become another. Can I unravel my encounter without disrupting the integrity of the other when disruption is transformative? Mercy recovery loosens my imaginary self, dissolving its grief of separation. Last night I dreamt of an ancient plant species, dark mirrored horsetails swaying in water that creep slowly through the reeds. There are open patches of light reflections and rivulets shining at dusk. Is it time for them to move on? I come to new-cut young pines by the marsh and shiver at their broadcast distress. Why doesn't the larger soul of the forest absorb their energy back underground to her roots and mycelial networks for other trees who are alive? Is my dream warning us to withdraw our spirits into the general human intention? Neon moss, ferns, and lichen cover exposed roots. Rain from the day before when we were awake sits in big drops on spider webs and slides down from high trees. Arriving, I mean dreaming, at the beach, I find the limb of an ash tree washed up by the tide, leaves green and clapping together in the breeze. Sing to us, I hear. There is not language in my message of gratitude for the dying branch, for its beauty, for holding the ground so long with its roots, for its shade, oxygen, vitality. Metaphoric dreams are a way to integrate novel ecological relations among beings or places, so difference is sustained. During the day, the forest is wild, yet I see trees in my dream as a garden. Illness remains terrible. I experience a sleep as my own aliveness. Time passed, but it was different than now. Time was our environment with an extra dimension. Most have not experienced such a condensed upheaval in consciousness as this. Even the cellular memories of my dead mother will change with collective trauma and its new pathways. Those who were here before and after compose a quantum field now. Our DNA responds to an ecology of virus by entwining with its reproductive vitality. How I look at relationship is different now. When I wake, there is compromise. I say again to offer the miasm more space so we may foresee possibility when intense fear and love for others arise at the same time. If I can hold such polarity without trying to escape what happens and will happen, chaos and transcendence entwine. Space opens at the edge of our uncertainty, a kind of listening. So when my mother speaks, I strain to wake within the planetary grace of her death. Just as a large oak transpires water and chthonic energy from ground up to sky, our living trinity of immune system, RNA, and virus conducts, but it's an alien communion. There is ambiguity between light and dark, not discernible in healthy people. Presence and horizon dissolve into one space with the force of a novel perception that evades any attempt to denote it. Problems of survival, of physical suffering in the foreground are reframed by extending their vanishing points out to possibility. Depth unlinks associations between self and disease that were so exigent. Then imagining fervid dreams, fear metaphors are gateways. This ability of organisms to self-regulate dissolving boundaries is a form of cognition. Emergence from daily life, crystals, proteins, quantum computers are more social, relative. Climate joins COVID-19 in a futurist matrix we call, when we are awake, a hyperobject, or asleep, mycorrhizae, a listening that's faster and more entangled than we can contain. The oak tree shows us responsibility as the actual movement of growth and the expression of care, a green color. Then the frail, the alive rise to such heights, they will be new avatars of evolution when vulnerability, our uncertainty, is challenged as the capacity to hold space for another. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maymay. That was a beautiful poem, and thank you so much, too, for hopefully gifting us your interview. Still yet to sign the papers, but please do. I feel so blessed to have this richness here in the room, this poetry, to conclude our conference, this creativity, and this oak tree of care. and the space of openness that everyone has made possible here today. I want to again thank all of the interviewees who gifted us their stories, who let us have them in the archive, and who also kept them for themselves. All of the participants today, all of our moderators, again, the CSW staff, Leslie Tulene, all of the people who came together yesterday at our wonderful sharing of affirmations of being seen. I am just thrilled to be part of this community. I do have a logistical thing to end with, which is sort of the down part of this conclusion, which is that we're ending our conference now. Thank you all for your participation. We do need a little help clearing the chairs. So if you, okay, after I make this announcement, we have, we will need help clearing the chairs. So we're going to do one thing, and then we're going to ask you if you could help us move the chairs back there, back, or here to the side. Okay, so that's going to come in a second.
We also wanted to mention, please take a few minutes to complete the survey. The code is up there. If you don't have time to do it now, we will be emailing you with a reminder, and if you can do it now, great. If you would rather wait until you get your reminder, which will have all kinds of other goodies in it, including links to the access copies, then you can do it later. Yes, Juliet, did you want to?
Thank you so much. I just want to thank all the organizers of the conference, Helen, Rachel, Leslie, Katya, and Megan, for bringing together this amazing space. They've really shown us what can happen when you center care and community in this really generative way. So, thank you so much. And, this is also the first in-person conference for our Abolition, Medicine, and Disability Justice grant. And so, the MRPI co-PIs out in the audience, we just want to thank you so much for everything that you've done. And make sure you check your email for bookshop.org.
Oh,
thank
awesome.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So I am just ending by giving a special thanks to Leslie, because I have never seen anyone work so diligently and efficiently and without this, always cheerfully. She put everything into this conference, as well as, of course, our wonderful staff, Katja and Rosa and Rosie. So Leslie, can you please come up and accept these flowers?
Do you want to take down your mask and sing? Do you want to take down your mask and sing?
Yay.
Or just be drawn.
So thank you, everybody, so much again. And thank you, everybody, for sharing and for being wonderful. I learned so much. So we will take care of the chairs. We're about to be told where they have to go. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And you will receive a follow-up email, as I said, with various mementos of the conference. So thank you again.